Good morning, all. Good morning. This is exciting. We got a lively crowd. This is going to be great for the game show that we do after this. Oh, you didn't know that was coming, right? No, just kidding. My name is Will LaVeist with Mennonite Mission Network. Honored to be here. Honored to see such a lively, multi-generational crowd because you could have easily gone somewhere else. So I never take it for granted when people come to hear a presentation or you be able to share some information that God has put on my heart, and I believe this is what we're called to do. We have some individuals here from Mission Network, some of the family. Jane is here, one of our editors, and Joe Sawatsky is also here, he's also with AMBS, and I think Travis may come in and out. Is there any other Mission Network people here? Okay, good. I just want to make sure it's represented. So this presentation is called Afrocentric Anabaptists, and it's about a project that I'm working on, a documentary project that I'm working on that is very instructive in terms of what we do with Mission Network, as well as just overall the mission outreach and the importance of mission outreach. I think there's some seats. There's some seats over here. I see my illustrious Bishop Francisco and his beautiful daughter come in, so appreciate you all. Either, wherever you feel comfortable. Look at Lauren. Jeez, I remember Lauren when Lauren was knee-high to her aunt. Wow, okay. It's beautiful to see you. So my name is Will LaVeist, Senior Executive of Advancement for Mennonite Mission Network. Been in this role for, going on 15 years. And the irony of Bishop Francisco walking in here is that I was living in Hampton, Virginia. I was a columnist, and the newspaper industry is undergoing a lot of changes. So they shut down the paper, and then I started working on my doctorate. And I was attending C3, Calvary Community Church, the place to be. And Bishop Francisco says, they got this role over at Mission Network, and the beauty of it is you don't have to move again. You can do it remotely. And this is like 2011, right? 2011, 2012. So that was almost like unheard of, that people are working remotely. And he said, you can still work on your doctorate. I'm thinking this will just be 2 years. I'll finish the doctorate. I'll go on and do something else. It's now 2025. So that just tells you about, the vision of listening to a good leader, man of God, and what God will do in your life. And so it's been one of the most fulfilling experiences that could have had, because actually it allows me to combine my journalism background and fundraising and storytelling background in ways that I really didn't think possible. So what this project is about, and give you some sense of Afrocentric, is really about the African continent diaspora being at the center and culture being at the center of the conversation. And so it's a documentary series. It'll probably have about 4 or 5 episodes where we are contacted. We had the opportunity to speak to people from Africa. Actually, I spent time in South Africa, spent time in South America, and also African Americans here in the States. And so you got interviews representing more than 30 black leaders in the Mennonite Church in various capacities, which Bishop Francisco is one. You're going to recognize him later when you see the trailer. And it's been a very enlightening experience, because they had never really been asked a lot of their thoughts about what their experiences have been in the church. Okay, here goes another superstar from the Camley family. Thank you. Good to see. Wow, good to see you. Looking great. So I got my whole family here. So the thought behind it is that, has mission become a bad word? A lot of younger generations perceive and see mission work as being associated with colonialism and damaging cultures, damaging people, right? But we still know that the gospel is still very much needed and necessary today, right? So there's truth to that. But it's also true that it's not the whole story, and it's by no means the end of the story. Because as a result of mission outreach, you now have the largest growth of the Anabaptist movement happening in Africa, happening in Asia, happening in South America. So how could it be, despite the pain, despite the imperfections, despite the outright wrongs and mistakes, how could it be a bad word? 3% of Anabaptists now live in Europe, where the movement began. We just are celebrating Anabaptism at 500. It's a great celebration in Zurich. But that's not where the Anabaptists are. And as a result of the mission outreach that has changed that dynamic. 36% Anabaptists are in Africa. Many Africans and people of African descent throughout the diaspora joined the movement as a result of mission outreach. So is mission a bad word? So in this project, we asked some of these, it looked at some of these themes, what have been the experiences of people of African descent, black people in the Mennonite Church? What are some of the unique gifts that these different related but yet distinct cultures? Because we don't all look alike. We're not all alike. I can tell you my background. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, United States. I got a Dominican mother, Afro-Latina, father with Caribbean roots. But my experience growing up in Brooklyn is very much an African-American, Southern influence, Caribbean influence experience. I go Arizona, African-Americans, Arizona experience is very different. California is very different. Caribbean's different. But there are very strong common threads. So what are those unique gifts do they bring? And then ultimately, what are the lessons learned that the whole church can benefit from the African-American experience? So here's some of the questions that I asked. Your journey, your testimony, brief overview, history, Mennonite Church. What about Anabaptism you believe appeals to the black community? These are some of the questions that I asked as I was in Africa, and asked them about their experience in South America as well as here in the States. So what are some common themes? A lot of people of African descent drawn to the Anabaptist movement because of the theology, the emphasis on truly following Jesus. It's one thing to say, I'm a Christian, which is a word Jesus never used. And say, one thing to say, I'm a believer, I'm in the church. But there's a whole other thing to really look at the Sermon on the Mount, really look at the Beatitudes, really follow the way of Jesus. So that's something that's very much drawn. And also, for many of us in the States, in our experience, Martin Luther King was an Anabaptist. I mean, that's exactly what he was preaching: peace, nonviolence, direct social action, not nonviolence. Let me just stay on the side and do my thing and watch injustices go on, but let me be engaged, right? And so those are key. Some of the examples, Columbia Church that we visited in Bogota, much of how they gain sort of respect in the community is because they're known for actually engaging and bringing peace to the communities at a time where there's a tremendous amount of conflict. Paramilitary, military, gay, lots of things, and they were bringing peace, actively putting their bodies on the line. Again, not staying in my community and going to church and just, worshiping and then having breakfast afterwards, but actually engaging. Ricardo Esquivel, who I was able to sit down and interview with, he's in a lot of ways like Colombia is like the Martin Luther King of Colombia. And he worked directly with the community outside of Cartagena, which is where a lot of Afrocentric culture, a lot of African peoples are at. In that community, they had tremendous violence where the paramilitaries and the militaries are fighting each other And they're caught in the middle because of their land, and people want access to their land for capitalist interests and so forth. And they were actually, in many ways, were massacred. My wife and I were there and hearing these stories, and we were just brought to tears because we were thinking about where we were in the States at the time. And she said something that was profound. She said, when this was going on, this is in the early 2000s, she said, I was at Disney. Mm-hmm. And what we were hearing in the States was that it was all about the drugs. And it wasn't about the drugs, right? So he worked with the community and the women of Mount Puhan who, through quilt making from a missionary who taught quilt making as a part of ministry to deal with their pain and their healing through quilting. And then from there, they actually led a march to the Capitol to get reparations for the destruction that was done to their community. So this is a kind of bringing the gospel to life that is happening. John Powell, here in the States, who many of you who know and be familiar with, when he was younger, worked with, in Chicago, directly with gangs and gang violence. So it's really core that the theology and really living out the theology has been key. Community engagement, as I said. You see Leonard Dow, who's a former pastor and now with Everence. He talked about the fact that being in the community and engaging is core to the Black church experience in the United States and in other places as well, but very much so in the United States. You can't actually be a church and just be on the corner and you're not doing anything in the community. You're not a church. I could tell you C3, Calvary Community Church, very active in the community. And also very interesting, and I don't have it here, but Calvary, and something we talk about in the documentary, has a lot of people in the community who have military background. You don't want to be bothered with that, right? But Hampton Roads is a strong military community. So in the interview, Bishop talks about that. It's like, so what was I supposed to do? Not minister to the people, right? And then guess what? Glenn Guyton, now executive director of Mennonite Church USA, comes to Calvary, and no one pressured him about or looked to shun him or the Holy Spirit worked on his own through the preaching, through the love at the church, and he came to his own decisions. But you'll find that community engagement. What is your community? How am I going to engage it? Right? Also, I mentioned the Belizean Church in LA. One of their core ministries is working with people on Skid Row. So it's almost impossible for you to say, I'm a follower of Jesus and then not be engaged in trying to help people in their lives. Another key theme you see in all of these churches, from Africa to South America to the States, evangelism. The Gaifana churches, which is Gaifana people are from out of Honduras area in South America, one of the communities where they were able to retain a lot of their African culture because of fighting back colonialism and being isolated. One of the things in their church, and they're with LMC, has been able to grow is because they intentionally go and plant other churches. It's like they intentionally disciple leaders. And if someone is, for example, taken away for a job, they're in New York and they go to a job in North Carolina, the expectation is that you're going to go to North Carolina and start a church. MKC, the largest church. During the Derg, during the time in Ethiopia was a lot of political strife and they were under a lot of suppression, is when the church grew the most. So this idea of evangelism and reaching out and sharing is a common theme that you will see. And then also a common theme is experiencing racism. It's something that we all, Africans, South Americans, North Americans, cannot get away from. This almost seems like distant history because of what's going on in the country now. But the George Floyd murder brought an awareness. And one of the things that was profound about it, I think and I'll just speak for myself, someone here in the States, is the worldwide awareness of racism and how racism exists in so many other places, in every continent. And that was one of the things that was really profound for me. So an example of it was I had no idea that in Indonesia, which is celebrated as a multicultural country where people get along, right? I had no idea that in Indonesia they actually have a black indigenous population that is suppressed. And so during this time, they began to galvanize. So you see people galvanizing in Australia and Indonesia. I'm like, wow, wait a minute. This is really a situation, an endemic situation that we just cannot get away from. And so in every continent, you have anti-blackness. And so this is oftentimes when mission workers go out, they go where? Into communities where people are marginalized, where they are oppressed, and they want to help. So it's endemic, is critical that you going into a situation like that you have an understanding of the culture of the people and to make a difference. And one of the interesting things about, in talking with some of the missionaries over the years, especially some of the earlier generations, other than language emerged, they really didn't have a lot of cultural understanding, cultural preparation to go. And so a lot of these things are changing and different. And so a lot of the reason that was really a catalyst for me, and I believe God laid on my heart to explore, well, what has been the experience of people of African descent in the Mennonite Church? And I knew I was on the right track because it's almost with every person that I spoke with, they said, you know what? Nobody ever asked me this. When I was talking with Ricardo, I mentioned, I was honored to meet him, excited to meet him because of his work and how he's revered in the country. He told me, I'm excited to meet you. I said, what do you mean? He said, I've never met a black Mennonite at your level. Every time they come here, there's all these white, he's saying in Spanish, I'm getting a translation from his wife. He said, every time they come here, they're all white. I said, I wanted to see you and touch you and see who you are, right? So I knew that I was on the right track because none of them have been asked these kinds of questions. So anti-blackness is a worldwide phenomenon, but there's different experiences based on cultural context. Like, for example, in Africa, obviously, you have African peoples oftentimes have a better sense of their history and culture and a different level of confidence. Colonialism has affected them differently. A lot of it is a lot of more ethnic strife may be different than the African-American experience. But painful personal stories is what you'll see in a documentary. And I'll point out some of those. And then things such as often being denied leadership opportunities. So a lot of the African leaders that talk about that, you experience that here in the States as well. So people are highly qualified to do the work, but because of racism, you're not being allowed to step into your calling, right? So these are common themes. Some of the stories, I've got a black preacher who talks about talking at a church, and then the tradition, you have to end of you give your sermon, you stand by the door, people greet you. You standing by the door and people are ignoring it. This is white Mennonite Church here in the United States, right? Pastor told a leader of a sister Mennonite church, told him, I'm afraid of you. Why are you afraid of me? Because I don't understand how you're able to do what you can do without our help. That's real. That happened, right? Black student, Mennonite college, ostracized by white students. we have a lot of students here. Black student grew up in a Mennonite church where she experienced a lot of love, security. She's like, okay, I'm going to a Mennonite college. I'm going to have some of the best experiences of my life. She had some of the worst experiences of her life. She's in her 50s. In an interview, she starts crying, talking about this. College is supposed to be one of the best years of your life. Went to college, was ostracized just because he's black. This is a Christian school, right? Black woman in leadership accused of being aggressive and angry simply because she's being assertive and saying, this is what thus saith the Lord. No, you need to be in your place. Afro-Latino leaders. A lot of times people think, and I shared with you in my background, having an Afro-Latino mother, a lot of times people think, racism in South America is, it's not bad there. In a lot of ways, it's worse. Because there's this benign acceptance of how things are, and it's mixed in an interesting way with class, just as it is here, but it's in an interesting way. And so you've got people who have African blood in them being discriminatory against someone who's darker skinned just because they're darker skinned. But it's because of the histories of how those countries and cultures develop. So there's a situation where a brother said, I'm overhearing this is a fellow brother saying, what are these blacks doing here? They need to go and do their own thing. This is real. These are not, and no one had ever asked them about these things, right? So despite the pain, despite these experiences, despite being marginalized, still continued passionate love for mission and a love for the church in the Anabaptist perspective. So is mission a bad word? So we also asked about, okay, so what are some of the unique gifts that these different cultures you think bring to the experience? So see, that's Pastor Ledesma and his wife in South America talking about rhythm in the services. I was there, but there's rhythm. And for me, it's like, it's just really interesting. You all know that to go, and it's like, wow, I recognize that song, but the language is different, and the beat is the same. There's a live rhythm. Melanie Purnell, did I see Melanie walking in? Yeah, raise your hand, Melanie. She's another star in it. She talks about the freedom of worship, right? Look at the gifts, even expression of the body, utilizing the body. From the African context, Jesus constantly being described as suffering person, this bleeding, this Christ, the slave, this lamb, the slain, the crucified being. So he's talking about the gift of pain and what that can bring to your worship experience. Let me see. Another one, John Powell, one of my mentors. Unwavering faith in God and community brings to the emotional part of the church. So there's an intellectual, we are mind, body, and spirit. Intellectual's part is important. You go to Calvary, you're going to get a whole lot of intellectual, but you also going to get a whole lot of emotional and spiritual. It's not just about talking and highbrowing about God, but how is this really affecting you in your life? And Giselle Guiti, my sister, we are very strong-minded and very rooted in what we believe, and I think that's part of the thing that I hold on to. She's talking about the Gaifana because of their background and history, like I told you, about being able to retain their culture. They hold on to that very strongly. And so, again, worshiping God in your own context is very strong, you see these common themes. So what are some lessons, learned that I think, and I'd like to have even some feedback and some thoughts about this, is the importance of evangelism and discipleship. You see that theme coming through all of these different experiences. Rapid growth, as I mentioned, of MKC in Ethiopia because of the Anabaptist theology, not the culture, not feeling, oh, we're Mennonites, so we must now dress a certain way and act a certain way, but it's that theology that inspired them to go out and disciple. Autonomy, growth, and a lot of activity happens when a church is planted and established, and it is allowed to be the church that it needs to be, that God is calling it to be in its community, in its way, in its culture. The Belizean church, they talked a lot about how people came aware of the church as, that's the Belizean church in LA. And so they want to go, and they had the autonomy and they had the space to be able to worship in their way. So for example, not everybody in the Mennonite family is okay with using a drum, right? Drum is core to Belizean worship style, core to Gaifuna, core to African peoples, but you'll get into a lot of intellectual debates about that. Cultural respect. One of the stories is told about a missionary who first went to Honduras, white missionary, that one of the things he did, he studied the language and studied the culture and became part of the people. And they were all amazed, like, why this white guy, he's acting like this, and he's eating like, and he's here with us. And so he developed relationship out of cultural respect. We have some of our missionaries in Mission Network family who, I think of Irene Weaver, right, who began this shift of, you really need to respect the people and their culture where they are, meet them where they are, not try to impose who we think we are on them. And as I said earlier, community focus. That's core to the Black experience. So it's not just about coming to a church, drive-by church experience, come in and leave, but what are you actually doing in the community around you? So, Mennonite Mission Network, our approach very much is building on what our forefathers, mothers established, and doing mission in a way that is mission us together and walking together and going where we are invited to go, not where we are trying to impose ourselves to be, and engaging with people in their context and helping and to them to do the work that they are called to do in their context. I see back there my good friend, Oscar Sawali, is South Africa. He's one of our partners in Mission Network, working actively in peacemaking in South Africa. There's no one from Mission Network is telling him, you need to do it this way. It's, Oscar, how can we help you to be successful in what you're doing? Growth of Anabaptism worldwide is the result of mission outreach in their own context. And so let me ask the question, so what should be the approach of North American missionary efforts today? We have a lot of young people here. We have a lot of people, I'm sure, who have had missionary experience. What should be the approach? The approach some generations ago, imperfect, but I think they were still passionate and believing what they were doing. That was we are going to win souls for Christ. We are going there, and believe it or not, one of the things that is talked about in the documentary is how Christianity is not brought to Africa by the Western missionaries. Joe Sawatsky, who was there, he's one of the people we interviewed. He teaches about that at AMBS. He's taught about that in Ethiopia. Bishop has taught about that. The Ethiopian church is one of the oldest Christian communities, period. So Christianity was not new to Africa when the missionaries started going in 1800s or so. So it's definitely not new, as I showed earlier now, as the growth is happening in Africa, happening in South America. And a lot of these missions that were established, a lot of these communities, a lot of these ministries are now actually sending missionaries out into other places. So in all of that new this Anabaptism at 500 context, what is the approach? What should we be doing now? What should it look like for North American mission workers? Any thoughts? Yes.
I think, my friend was talking about this a lot, how, so you mentioned that the 3% of the Anabaptist community is from, the West, and like 36% in Africa.
Correct.
So, one thing that I was thinking about is maybe now it's time for this part of the world to be ready to accept or like receive what they can learn from us, from what we have brought in. For example, now it's time for like missionaries becoming from that part of the world to be teaching their culture and how Christianity or Anabaptism goes with their culture, what they have to give. Because there are a lot of people that have things that to give to this side of the world as well that I think, well, living here now for about 3 years, I think that this part of the world folks will do here. And so I think it's time that instead of giving, maybe take a step back to receive, that's the money that's real true.
So, where are you originally from?
I'm Congolese, but I grew up and I was born in South Africa.
Absolutely. That absolutely is one of the things that was talked about. It was mentioned that context is very important. Who's sending and who can learn from who, and being in mutual engagement and relationship. Right. Stanley Green talked about it as it used to be in the first half of the mission outreach phase. We were object submission, and now that's certainly not the case. And even as I told you, Christianity wasn't new to Africa. One of the things that one of the ministers I interviewed from Ethiopia talked about how the Ethiopian context, the church, the Orthodox Church in Ethiopia is probably much like Catholic, the Catholic Church, in that it was part of it was a state religion. So a lot of times it was just sort of embedded in the political structure of everything. And so what the Anabaptists brought to them was this notion of, again, reading the Bible on your own. And even the text in Ethiopia was in a language that ordinary people couldn't even read. So it makes you think of here in Latin. You got to learn Latin to read God's word, right? So she's absolutely right. This context of what you can learn from others. Anybody else? What should mission look like today? Yes.
There's a lot of young adults in my church who are former missionary kids, and there's a sort of general cynicism among them. They give heart because of growing up as missionary kids, I think, and seeing how sausage gets made. They viewed mission as a dirty word because several of the people in my church would argue that there is no such thing as missions that's not colonizing. And so I'm just wondering how you at the Mennonite Mission Network grapple with that. Should you still be the Mennonite Mission Network? Well, how do you talk about non-colonizing approach? Yes.
I think we give the examples of how we are actually engaging with ministries and how we are actually responding to what they're asking for, as opposed to responding to what we think they should have and what we think they should do. And much of it is about relationship and really being willing to put your body and your mind in the culture and at risk as the partner, the cousin, as Oscar says, is doing the same. And then I would also say, again, look at the result. With all of the pain and all of the problems and all of the mistakes, look at where the growth is happening. The growth is happening where people who are actively doing mission, actively doing discipleship. So it also becomes a conversation about, how do you define mission? Is it that you're going to build a well for somebody or do something for them, or are you going to walk alongside and be a brother and sister to them and help them and learn from them, and in fact learn things that, as the sister was saying, that you can come to your community and make a difference. So I would challenge them to define, okay, well, what is your definition of mission? Or what do you think that we should be doing, or you should be doing? Mission is discipleship. Yes.
I want to agree about the angle about bringing back to North America and Europe, because talk about 3% in Europe, but tons of people leaving the church because they're tired of like the Christian nationalism, the hate-filled Christianity, things like that. And there's like a mission field of like, all these people are leaving Christianity because they don't see Christianity looking like Christianity anymore. And some of the things you talked about earlier in your message, like the community, the theology, the closely following Jesus, like people want that now. That they often don't see where the alternative is within the church, and they're just looking for that opportunity. There's a huge field within people who are leaving Christianity to explain. Yeah.
I agree. I said something earlier. I said Jesus never used the word Christian. So maybe leaving Christianity is not a bad thing. If leaving Christianity means that you are following more in the way, maybe that's not a bad thing. Because there's a lot of people walking around saying they're Christians, and I'm not going to get political. Lauren looked at me like, yeah, go ahead, say it. No, I'm not, no. Not going to do it, no. But think about it. How many people who say they're Christians, but are you really walking in the way? So maybe that is something that's might be percolating, may be happening. Because to your point, I don't see people running away from Jesus. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
So continue to go off of that. I have to say, maybe mission does sort of have to begin at home, where we have to invite the members of our own community in first too. So we need to build up ourselves as well, like the way that we're starting to be more open to different people. Within the last 10 years, we're not invited the LaVeist community to be a huge part of the church, and like the progressiveness of the elections is kind of continuing on the way here. To preach that and sort of the welcoming nature first, to make people very comfortable with it, and then can continue. I don't know.
No, I think you're making an excellent point that different times in a country or a culture's history, calls for different kinds of outreach. Calvary Community Church is a result of urban mission. The churches in Newport News, Virginia, up in the northern part of Newport News, Virginia, predominantly white, as a result of things that's going on in the country in the 50s and 60s. A lot of the segregation going on, felt convicted that we need to do missions, be neighbors. But then where they got stuck at was the inviting people in. I was like, nah, Bishop, I like you, you shine my shoes, but you're not preaching. So you're right. Can we get to that point of, okay, reaching out and then being able to invite in, and even being able to agree to disagree and still be in fellowship together? That's one of the things, I gotta be honest, that's one of the things that's really kind of frustrated me about our church, MCUSA, that I'm glad God gave me this project, because it's like I thought the gospel was we're supposed to be able to not always agree on each other, but still be in fellowship and still walk together and see each other's humanity. But it's like all this, I don't agree with you, so I can't sit with you. I mean, that seemed antithetical, to me. And I was being challenged by that. I would admit personally. And then, God gave me this and said, no, there's a bigger story. There's more things to do.
I think one of the things too is you like cross population of the cultures. We were actually doing some mission work in South Africa. And we were going over, working with the congregation there in Japan, trying to see what we could do to help them. And during the process, I was many years ago, during the process, Holy Spirit just led us and said, hey, why are we trying to evangelize? We need to take some passage from South Africa and convert them to America. And that's what we did. We passed from South Africa, planted in America.
Rancho.
Yeah, Rancho.
I interviewed.
And you do your church, you started a church and it was quite successful. But it's that type of thing that we don't know anything. Sometimes we bring it off the whole, but again, what you said is you wanted to bring other people into our environment and not necessarily have to change or be like them, but accept it. I know when I go to English churches, I fit in. You sing the 4-part harmony, we don't do that.
Right. But you don't knock it.
I don't knock it. That's wrong, you guys don't have it right, the people 1 3. But then when you come to our church and you hear a different form of worship, we should have that same type of reciprocity to be able to respect the culture that our tradition to our that talking.
Right. That's what it's like. He told an interesting story. Pastor Ranchard being in South Africa. When he's in South Africa, he's considered colored.
Right.
So he tells me a story. He said, "Well, I come to the States, and everybody they're speaking Spanish to me. They're speaking this and that, and they're thinking, he's a Latino or, a light skin." And then he said one time he used the word colored. And he almost got in a lot of trouble. Because he's like, and then somebody pulled his aside and said, no, you can't say color there. We know what it means there, you just can't say color there. So that's sort of an example like cross-punk and what happens. But if you're the body of Christ, you're supposed to be create that space where someone can make those mistakes and adjustments and learn the differences without knocking each other. But we very much in a climate where it's like, I don't agree with you, so I don't want to be around. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm going off what you said. I think going in with an open mind, you notice there's versus like going in with like a stick or not like like working with other communities, hearing other people's stories. That's really a fun part of like working towards a common goal.
Absolutely.
And being open to how you might be changed along the way. That's kind of part of the journey. It's like, things happen, change your perspective along the way. Yep. Yes.
Going back to the non-North American versus the world perspective, I do just want to say a caveat of it. I think it would be a very cheap discipleship in grace if the white body only starts to listen to the voice and plight of our neighbors in the U.S. only when missionaries come. And so I think, yes, we need this decolonial center of knowledge, decolonial center of where the church is moving outside of the body of the U.S., particularly the white body. But I also think we need to be willing to, as W.D. Du Bois says, the external way that the U.S. engages the world won't change until the internal way changes. And so I think keeping that in mind, that balance of how do we internally keep addressing the breakages of community in our own community while bringing people in as well.
I think that's an excellent point, because even when you go, if you're broken, when you go abroad, will bring that brokenness with you, as opposed to, yeah. That's an excellent point. Oscar.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the session. I was looking forward to it. I think the two things for me that I would encourage the North American Church to constantly think about. I look back in the late 80s, early 90s into the democratic dispensation in South Africa, and how the racial issue in the church was not on the table. As a result, even as white churches were getting into the black communities, ministering, they felt that segregation was the best way of worshiping. And even people that were getting saved in the middle of the town, literally living in town, were referred back to the township because that's where black people were living according to the segregation. And that left a lot of pain in hearts of many, and even some who were in ministry ministered out of that pain. And so I think as I've been interacting with people even here over the last 15, 16 years, I think there is a need to constantly think about, I think about the fact that I'm black. And I think about how do I present myself being black? How do I present myself in such a way that I don't scare someone who is not used to seeing my color? I preached in a number of churches in Kansas, and a lovely warm welcome. And I was conscious of the fact that there are very few black people in that neighborhood, if there are. But I think the race issue, racism issue, has to be constantly on the table, and we have to be constantly thinking about it and thinking about our biases, and probably reflecting on it all the time without feeling guilty, but looking at how do I make sure that I deal with this issue. And so we should not close it in the pot, wishing that it will go away. It's not going to go away. God has made us to be different colors for a purpose. I'm sure He hoped that we'll be able to embrace one another and love the different colors. So for me, that will be my contribution. The second one that I'll stop is embracing pain. I think one of the things in the African church is the understanding of pain, and God continues to just stir the church with the aspects of pain, and I believe that's part of what brings the growth in the church in Africa. There's something about being too comfortable as a Christian that speaks to not doing the will of God and not being in the manner in which you're supposed to live. I think there's a reason why Jesus said it is as hard as the camel going. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, we know you're going to preach. Yeah. No, but thank you for that, Oscar. That's very profound and great transition as we wrap. I want to show the trailer again. The goal is to have it available for viewing by the end of the year or early next year. Probably be about 4 episodes, because as you can just perceive, there was so much rich that was said and shared. So with that, thank you. Appreciate you all listening. You've given me some thoughts that I'm going to apply to it as we go forward. And let me introduce you to the trailer, Afrocentric Anabaptists. What is a black Mennonite Anabaptist Christian? Sounds like a mouthful of a question, especially if you're not Mennonite or Anabaptist or haven't heard of either. Puzzling if you have heard of both, but black doesn't fit the visual in your mind. Instead, you see a white man dressed in a plain black coat and domed top hat, or a white woman in a cape dress and white bomber. Their family riding together in a horse-drawn buggy.
You
what's a Midianite? I heard you's a Midianite, what's that, Amish? Yeah.
You know, it's so interesting, the head covering, and even in Harlem, right?
At one time, I remember being called New Mennonite, and it was in a room, and they called us. They said, "You all are New Mennonite," and I looked around, and I wasn't being. I said, "Who's new?"
People have a stereotype when you say Mennonites. They immediately go in Eastern Pennsylvania, horses and buggies and all this stuff. So
Mennonites.
Curiously, initially, we started thinking, okay, that to be a Mennonite, you had to have been born in Germany or somewhere over there.
And so when I talked about being Mennonite, las personas, they looked at me and were like, what?
and I looked it up, and it had a picture of a covering. It didn't have a head, just a woman's head on it, but just this covering. And they said something just around conservative, people of modest means, simple living type thing.
Well, of course, as you can tell, I don't dress in how people understand Mennonites to be.
Yes, Black, Mennonite, and Anabaptists, Africans, African Americans, Afro-Latinos. They are Afrocentric Anabaptists.
We are kind of forming some families of Mennonites in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But the Mennonite values are spreading beyond those families of the first people who joined.
The Anabaptists in South Africa are not that well known, so as a result, there are very, very small communities here to assist and be in solidarity with South Africans who are experiencing, of course, the issue of segregation and apartheid.
What gifts had their similar yet distinct cultures brought to the Anabaptist movement? What have their experiences been like in the church? In this multi-episode docufilm series from Mennonite Mission Network, we explore these questions. Join the journey as we show why mission outreach has been so vital to the spreading of the gospel of Jesus Christ and why it continues to remain relevant today.
I still feel like it's kind of weird for me to be the executive director of Mennonite Church USA. But I always tell my family it's been a blessing, right? It's been a blessing, my journey in this church. Even though culturally it's been weird at times, you get weird comments and people just don't know what to say. They're trying to connect with you. But the basic tenets of the faith, focusing on the Sermon on the Mount, focusing on the life of Christ has really been transformative to me.